Elias Thorne remembered the sound of humanity before it learned to sing in unison. He was an archivist, a curator of beautiful noise, and his home was the deep space station Mimosini, a spinning silver repository adrift in the silent gulf between star systems. His life's work was the preservation of chaos. From his console, he could conjure the roar of a Terran football stadium, the whispered confessions of a forgotten poet in a smoke-filled Parisian bar, the crashing orchestral fury of Beethoven, and the shrill, angry arguments of 1,000 dead politicians. He was a zookeeper for the ghost of human expression, and he loved every discordant note. The feeds from Earth were his constant companion, a vibrant, 24-hour cascade of life. News reports overlapped with screaming rock music. Scientific debates bled into soap operas. Children's laughter punctuated stock market reports. It was messy, inefficient, and glorious. It was the sound of a species still arguing with itself about what it meant to be alive. And Thorne believed that argument was the whole point. The change began subtly, a slow fade at the edges of the spectrum. First, the protest songs from the Martian colonies went quiet, replaced by placid, metronomic hymns. Then the raucous political talk shows on Earth's networks softened their tone, the fiery debates giving way to calm, moderated discussions where everyone seemed to agree. Thorne noted it in his logs as a cultural shift, perhaps a new era of global tranquility. He was a fool. Within a month, the chaos was gone, systematically filtered out of existence. The rock music was replaced by ambient, harmonic drones. The frantic news reports became monotone recitations of production quotas and weather patterns. The art, the films, the literature, all of it began to echo a single, serene, and utterly terrifying theme unity. The final broadcast he received from Earth was not a cry for help or a declaration of war. It was a simple, female voice, speaking in perfect, unaccented Federation standard, devoid of any emotion at all. The dissonance has been resolved. The harmony is complete. Be at peace. After that, there was only the hum, a low, constant, resonant frequency that vibrated through subspace, the sound of 8 billion minds placated into a single, cohesive thought. The crew of Mnemosini, all 73 of them, gathered in the central archive chamber, a cavernous space where data cores glowed like captured stars. They were curators, engineers, linguists, and technicians, the quiet custodians of a culture that had just been murdered. Kaylin, the station's chief engineer, a woman whose hands were permanently stained with grease and whose face was a roadmap of busted knuckles and old frustrations, slammed her fist on a console. They didn't even fight, she growled, her voice a raw scrape against the tomb-like silence. They just stopped. What the hell does that? Who does that? Her gaze fell on Thorne, the station's director, the man of words. You're the expert on alien chatter. Elias. What was that message? Who are they? Thorne felt a coldness spreading from his core, a glacial dread that froze the breath in his lungs. He had spent his life studying the signals of other species, the clicks of the insectoid Cathar, the shimmering light songs of the Cygnian nebulas. He had never encountered anything like this. This wasn't conquest. It was erasure. I believe, he said, his voice struggling to remain steady. They call themselves the Chorus. They're mentioned in a few fragmented pre-Federation texts, always as a myth, a ghost story traders would tell, a collective that doesn't conquer worlds, but calms them. He pulled up a file on the main holoscreen, a collection of garbled warnings from a long-dead race called the Geish. The translation was imperfect, but the meaning was clear. They do not bring fire, they bring silence. They unmake you from the inside. They teach you to forget you were ever screaming. Lena, a young data tech whose job was to categorize Earth's popular music, was weeping silently, her face illuminated by the soft blue glow of the data cores. My sister, she was in a band in New Berlin. She whispered. They were loud. They were angry. What did they do to her? Thorn had no answer. He could only imagine Lena's sister, her fiery spirit and rebellious anthems smoothed over, her mind gently retuned until all that was left was a placid contentment with the hum. The thought was more obscene than any act of physical violence. Over the next week, a heavy, suffocating despair settled over Mnemosyne. They were adrift, a cultural ark whose home port had vanished. They were the last free humans in the galaxy. Kaelin argued for flight. We have the archives. She insisted during a grim meeting in the mess hall. We jump to the uncharted rim, find a dead rock to hide behind, and we become ghosts. We keep the memory alive. That's the mission now. Preservation. Lena, her eyes red-rimmed and hollow. Agreed. Fighting is pointless. We don't even have weapons. We're a library. Kaelin, what are we going to do? Throw books at them. Thorn let them debate. He locked himself in his office, the hum from Earth's directions a constant, maddening thrum in the station's sensors. He listened to the silence where a civilization used to be and felt not just grief, but a profound, intellectual fury. The chorus hadn't defeated humanity. They had edited it. They had taken a complex, contradictory, and beautiful story and deleted every chapter that didn't fit their narrative. As an archivist, this was the ultimate sin. He spent days sifting through the station's deepest, most restricted files. Archives classified as existential threats by the old Federation government. These were not alien schematics or weapons designs. They were humanity's dark thoughts, its most dangerous philosophical and psychological theories. And buried within a project codenamed Pandora's Voice, he found it cognitive dissonance weaponry. It was a theoretical concept, born from the fear of encountering a true hive mind. The theory was simple. A sufficiently complex and contradictory psychic broadcast could overwhelm a collective consciousness, shattering its cohesion by introducing concepts it couldn't process: paradox, irony, grief, irrational love, senseless hatred. It was designed to be a weapon of last resort, a way to fight a psychic entity by weaponizing the very chaos of individuality. The Federation had deemed it too monstrous to build, an act of soul murder. Thorn looked at the designs, at the theories of mimetic contagion and psychic shock, and he saw not a monster, but a key. He saw the only weapon that could possibly fight a ghost made of harmony. He returned to the central archive chamber, his face pale, but his eyes burning with a cold fire that startled the weary crew. "We are not going to run," he announced, his voice echoing in the vast chamber. "We are going to answer." He brought the Pandora's Voice files onto the main screen. Complex equations and psychological flowcharts filled the air. The Federation was wrong. This isn't soul murder. This is an awakening. The chorus puts minds to sleep. We are going to be the alarm clock. Kaelin stared at the schematics, her engineer's mind slowly grasping the terrifying implications. You want to turn our broadcast arrays into psychic cannons. You want to weaponize the archives. Precisely, Thorne said. We are going to load our most potent memories. We'll broadcast the agony of a mother losing a child. We'll transmit the illogical joy of a perfect song. We'll send them the self-loathing of a traitor and the selfless love of a martyr. We will project the Gettysburg Address, followed immediately by the ravings of a mad king. We will give them Shakespeare and Nietzsche and every screaming, contradictory, broken, and beautiful piece of our identity. All at once, we will not attack their bodies. We will attack their certainty. A stunned silence filled the room. The idea was insane, sacrilegious. They were curators, not destroyers. But then Lena looked up from her console, her tear-streaked face hardening with a new resolve. Can we do it? She asked Kalen. Can the station handle it? Kalen looked from the schematics to Thorne, and for the first time in days, the weary defeat in her eyes was replaced by a dangerous spark. The primary broadcast array has enough power to crack a small moon if we bypass the governors. The data cores can stream a millennium of human history in seconds. It'll tear the station apart at the seams. But yes, I think I can make it work. That was the moment Namazene died and the Silence Breaker was born. The mission was no longer preservation. It was reclamation. Thorne brought up a star chart, pointing to a small green-blue world in a neighboring system. This is our target, Xylos. According to the last Federation Scout reports, the Xylonians were a fiercely individualistic, passionate species of avian artists. Their broadcasts went silent 3 months ago, replaced by the same harmonic hum as Earth. They are the chorus's newest converts. They are our test case. We will jump into their system, and we will broadcast our message. We will see if a mind, once quieted, can be taught to scream again. The decision was made. The quiet rhythm of the library was shattered. Engineers began tearing apart communication systems, rerouting power from life support and gravity plating into the main broadcast dish. Data techs, led by Lena, began the harrowing task of curating the mimetic payload. They weren't looking for the best of humanity, but the most potent. They compiled reels of war footage, audio of childbirth, recordings of deathbed confessions, the illogical formulas of quantum physics, the passionate, irrational declarations of lovers, the bitter manifestos of revolutionaries. They were building a bomb made of feelings. In the final hours before the jump, Thorne stood on the observation deck, the vast, empty blackness of space before him. The station vibrated around him, no longer with the gentle hum of an archive, but with the deep, hungry thrum of a weapon charging. He was a man who had dedicated his life to listening, and now his only purpose was to create a sound so loud, so abrasive, so full of pain and beauty, that it would tear a hole in the great, placid silence of the galaxy. He looked at the reflection in the reinforced glass, at the quiet, academic man he used to be. That man was gone, another casualty of the great quieting. In his place was a weaponer of memory, a general armed with poetry and rage. He keyed the shipwide comm. Kalen, status. Her voice came back, tight and strained. The dish is glowing. Elias, the core is screaming. We're ready to show these bastards what a real chorus sounds like. Thorne took a steadying breath, the first since Earth had fallen silent. Execute the jump. Space twisted, and the library vanished. on its way to war. The transition from slipspace was not a gentle arrival. It was a violent tearing, a physical wrenching of reality that sent a shudder through the very bones of the station. Alarms blared as the silence breaker slammed back into normal space-time, its repurposed systems groaning under stresses they were never designed to bear. Kalen's voice, sharp and laced with static, cut through the cacophony. Inertial dampeners are at 140%. We're holding, but just barely. The jump damn near shook us apart. On the bridge, Thorn gripped his command console, knuckles white, as the starfield stabilized on the main view screen. Before them hung Xylos, a swirl of emerald green and sapphire blue, a jewel of a world that should have been broadcasting a cacophony of avian song and artistic debate. Instead, there was only the hum, now amplified to a palpable presence, a low, oppressive vibration that seemed to press in on the station's hull. It was the sound of a world asleep, a lullaby sung by a monster. Sensors are clear. Lena's voice trembled from the data core nexus. No ships, no orbital platforms, just them. It feels thicker here. The hum. Thorn could feel it too, a subtle, insidious pressure against his mind, a gentle suggestion to let go of the tension in his jaw, to ease the frantic beating of his heart, to simply be. It was a seductive poison, and he fought it with a fresh surge of cold anger. "They're arrogant," he said, his voice a low growl. "They've never faced resistance. They leave their new acquisitions completely unguarded. Kalen, bring the broadcast array to full power. Lena, prepare to stream the payload on my mark." The next few minutes were a tense symphony of preparation. Down in engineering, Kalen and her team worked with a frantic, desperate precision, rerouting the last reserves of the station's power. Coolant hissed through overworked pipes, and the central reactor core, the heart of their vessel, began to glow with a furious, unstable light. The entire deck thrummed like a tuning fork struck with a sledgehammer. On the bridge, Thorn watched the power levels climb, the numbers on the screen glowing a stark, angry red. He could feel the station's pain, the agony of a machine being pushed past every conceivable limit. Lena's voice came over the comm, softer now, filled with a terrible awe. "The payload is spooled. The first sequence is ready. The cry of grieving. Audio from every recorded human funeral. Video of the immediate aftermath of every major Earth tragedy. The brainwave patterns of 1,000 poets contemplating loss. It's a weapon made of sorrow." Elias. Thorn closed his eyes for a fraction of a second, picturing the archive as it was a quiet sanctuary of knowledge. Now it was an arsenal of anguish. The chorus offers peace through emptiness. He murmured, more to himself than to his crew, "We will remind them that the most profound beauty is often born from the deepest pain. On my mark." He watched the shimmering atmosphere of Xylos, a world of sleeping artists, and felt a pang of something he couldn't afford to name. He was not a savior. He was a contaminator, about to unleash a plague of memory upon a world that had forgotten how to suffer. Mark. Kalen slammed a heavy, shielded lever into place. A deep, soul-shaking groan echoed through the station as the main broadcast dish, a delicate instrument of communication, became a cannon. The energy discharge wasn't a beam of light or a visible projectile. It was a wave of pure, concentrated meaning, a psychic shockwave of human grief fired across the void. Thorn felt a phantom echo of it in his own mind, a fleeting collage of a million shattered moments, of last goodbyes and silent tears. On the bridge, every screen monitoring the Xylon system flickered. For a moment, nothing happened. The hum from the planet remained, steady and implacable. No effect. Kaylin grunted, her voice tight with disappointment. Did we miss no? Lena whispered, wait. Then, the hum wavered. It was almost imperceptible at first, a slight tremor in the constant frequency, like a perfect note suddenly touched by a dissonant vibration. The tremor grew, becoming a violent shudder. The serene, harmonic frequency began to fracture, breaking apart into 1,000 shrieking, discordant pieces. On the planet below, a psychic storm had broken. The crew of the Silence Breaker could not see the chaos they had unleashed, but they could feel it. The sensor feeds that had shown a placid, unified consciousness now displayed a maelstrom of psychic energy, a chaotic explosion of raw, unprocessed emotion. They had not just woken the Xylonians, they had thrown them into a collective nightmare. It's working, Lena gasped, a mixture of horror and triumph in her voice. Their psychic cohesion is collapsing. I'm picking up screams, raw terror, confusion. Thorn felt no triumph, only the grim satisfaction of a surgeon confirming a brutal but necessary amputation. They've forgotten how to process these feelings, he said. They've lived in a state of placid harmony for months. Grief, to them, is a foreign entity, a virus attacking their minds. Kaylin, prepare the second sequence. Before Kaylin could respond, the nature of the hum changed again. The chaotic shrieking from the planet did not subside. Instead, it was as if a conductor had stepped onto the stage of a panicked orchestra. The formless psychic static began to coalesce, to focus. The decentralized, placid hum was gone, but in its place, something new was rising, a single, powerful, and utterly malevolent consciousness. It was no longer a gentle chorus, it was a furious soloist. A new voice, sharp and clear as crystal, cut through the comms, speaking not in audio, but directly into the minds of every human on the station. You are loud. The psychic voice was impossibly vast, ancient, and filled with a cold, analytical curiosity. It felt like being examined by a god. Thorn staggered back, clutching his head as the voice echoed in his skull, bypassing his ears entirely. It was a violation of the deepest kind. You bring dissonance, an interesting disease. We had thought this species cured. Who are you? Thorn projected back, a defiant thought against an ocean of consciousness. We are the resolution. We are the quiet at the end of the song. You are a single, jarring note, a flaw in the composition, and flaws must be corrected. The pressure on the station's hull intensified, but it wasn't physical. It was a psychic siege. The chorus, now focused into a single, terrifying will, was pushing back. Its own psychic energy, a crushing wave of pure, enforced tranquility. It was a command to be still, be quiet, be at peace. On the bridge, crew members slumped in their chairs, their faces going slack, their eyes glazing over. Down in engineering, the frantic activity slowed, a creeping lethargy dulling the edge of their panic. Elias Kalen's voice was a desperate roar over the comm, a point of angry focus in the rising tide of peace. It's trying to put us to sleep. Fight it, Thorn felt the seductive calm wash over him, promising an end to the fear, the anger, the responsibility. It would be so easy to let go. But then, an image flooded his mind. Unbidden, the silent, empty data feeds from Earth. The memory of a billion silenced voices was a shield of pure rage. He focused on the chaos he had curated, on the beautiful, terrible noise of his species. Lena, he shouted, both with his voice and his mind. Sequence 2. Now, all of it. Lena, her face pale and sweating, her knuckles white on her console, obeyed. With a trembling finger, she unleashed the rest of the payload. It was not a targeted stream of a single emotion, but a chaotic, simultaneous blast of everything. The irrational fury of a battlefield berserker, the complex genius of a quantum equation, the tender absurdity of a child's first lie, the soaring hope of an explorer stepping onto a new world, the crushing despair of a philosopher proving the futility of existence. It was the sound of humanity, unfiltered and weaponized. The psychic wave of pure contradiction slammed into the focused will of the chorus. The voice in Thorn's head did not scream. It recoiled, a movement of pure intellectual shock. Paradox, illogic, self-negation. This is madness. The crushing psychic pressure lessened for a moment. The entity thrown off balance by concepts utterly alien to its nature of perfect harmony. But the silence breaker was dying. Alarms shrieked with renewed vigor. Hull integrity failing on decks 7 through 9. A frantic voice called from damage control. The broadcast dish is melting. Core temperature is critical. We've got seconds before she blows. Kalen Thorn roared. Get us out of here. Any heading? I don't care. Jump, you cannot run from the silence. The chorus whispered in his mind, its voice regaining its composure, laced now with something new. Not just curiosity, but cold, lethal intent. We have heard your name, Elias Thorn. We have heard your song. We will learn it, and then we will unsing it. The stars outside the view screen dissolved into a vortex of screaming light as Kalen forced an emergency jump, a blind leap into the unknown. The last thing Thorn sensed from the hilos was not the hum of peace, but the raw, unfiltered chaos of a world's worth of minds screaming as they woke from a beautiful dream into a terrifying reality. The station slammed back into normal space with a final, agonizing groan. And then, an eerie silence fell. The alarms died. The secondary lighting flickered and went out, plunging the bridge into near darkness, lit only by the faint glow of a distant nebula through the viewport. Emergency power hummed weakly. They were alive, they were adrift, and they had just declared war on a god. Lena's sob broke the silence. What have we done? She whispered into the darkness. Thorn stood in the gloom, the chorus's final promise echoing in the depths of his soul. He had wanted to awaken a world. Instead, he had shattered it. He had wanted to fight a silent enemy, and in doing so, had given it a voice, a focus, and a name to hunt. He looked out at the cold, indifferent stars. It's a start, he said, and the words tasted like ash. The silence that followed the jump was heavier than the void outside. It was a silence born of broken machinery and shattered nerves. For a full minute, the only sound on the bridge of the silence breaker was the ragged, shallow breathing of its crew. Thorn pushed himself up, his muscles aching from the violent transition. The emergency lights cast long, dancing shadows, turning the familiar command center into a cavernous tomb. "Report," he commanded, his voice hoarse, absorbing the darkness. Kalen's reply crackled over the comm, thick with exhaustion and fury. "Report, you want to report? She's a corpse. Elias. The jump core is fractured. The main power conduit is slag. And the broadcast dish looks like a melted Dali painting. We're running on backup life support and whatever dregs I can squeeze from the secondary batteries. We're not adrift. We're a ghost. We're 1,000 light years from anywhere, running on fumes. And you've managed to personally piss off God." Her words were a physical blow, a litany of their failure. They had fired their one and only shot. And, while it had hit its mark, the recoil had crippled them. All around the bridge, crew members were slowly picking themselves up, their faces etched with the 1,000-yard stare of soldiers who had survived an impossible battle only to find themselves stranded behind enemy lines. Lena's station was dark, but Thorn could see her silhouette, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. He made his way to her, navigating the debris-strewn deck. "Lena," he said softly. She looked up, her face a pale mask in the gloom, illuminated by a single flickering emergency strip. Her eyes were not filled with fear, but with a profound, soul-deep horror. "The Xylonians," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I felt them when we broadcast. They weren't just confused. Elias. They were in agony. Imagine waking from a perfect dream to find your limbs have been sawn off. That's what we did. We gave them back their minds, but we broke them in the process. We threw a bomb made of pain into a quiet room." Her accusation hung in the air, more damning than any damage report. Thorn felt its weight settle onto his already burdened conscience. He had known there would be a cost, but the abstract calculus of war was nothing compared to the raw, human guilt of causing such suffering. "The peace they had was a lie," he countered, his voice lacking the conviction he intended. "It was the peace of the grave. We gave them a choice." "Did we?" she shot back, her whisper turning into a fierce, low hiss. "We ripped the choice from them. We forced them to remember pain. What if some of them were happy in the quiet? Who are we to decide their dream was a prison?" He had no answer for that, not one that would satisfy her, or himself. He turned away, his gaze falling on the star chart, a cold and indifferent map of their predicament. Kalen was right. They were nowhere, but nowhere was a relative term. He zoomed in on a dense, chaotic cluster of asteroids and nebulae on the edge of the charted systems. It was a place Federation ships avoided, a galactic dead end known on old pirate charts as the Shatterbelt. It was a graveyard of ancient wars, littered with the husks of dead ships and the ghosts of failed empires. And hidden deep within it was a place Kalen had mentioned once, in a drunken story from her pre-academic life, Gamora Station, a haven for smugglers, deserters, and anyone else who valued anonymity over safety. It was a place built entirely out of scrap, run by syndicates who bought and sold secrets, ships, and souls. It was the most dissonant, chaotic, and dangerously alive place in the sector. It was perfect. "Kalen," Thorn said into the comm, "set a course for the Shatterbelt. There's a station there." "Gamora." A burst of harsh, incredulous laughter was his only reply. "With what?" "Elias. A sailboat and a prayer. The jump drive is a paperweight. The impulse engines can barely keep our life support from freezing. It would take us 500 years to reach the Shatterbelt. Then fix it, Thorn said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Do whatever you have to do. Strip the replicators. Cannibalize the science labs. Reroute power from the archives themselves if you must. Get me one more jump. Just one. The next 3 days were a descent into a special kind of hell. Under Kalen's relentless direction, the silence breaker began to eat itself. Engineering teams, working in near darkness, tore panels from the walls, yanking out miles of secondary wiring to patch the main power conduits. The station's vast, silent archive chambers, once sacred ground, were violated. Data cores containing centuries of poetry, music, and art were shut down. Their energy diverted to the failing reactor. It was a symbolic act of desperation to save the memory of humanity. They had to start erasing it. Lena, her moral crisis giving way to the grim necessity of survival, found a new purpose. She and her team began sifting through the psychic residue of their encounter with the chorus, the faint echoes of the entity's consciousness left on their sensors. She was no longer a curator of art, but an analyst of the enemy's soul. It's not a hive mind. Not exactly. She explained to Thorn during a brief, exhausted meeting on the darkened bridge. It's more like an orchestra. The individuals are still there, but their consciousness is conducted. They're all playing the same note. But when we hit them with our broadcast, we introduced improvisation, chaos. The conductor was forced to reveal itself to restore order. She brought up a complex waveform on her datapad, a shimmering, intricate pattern of psychic energy. This is its signature, the conductor. It's vast, but it's not everywhere at once. It has focal points, nodes. If we could target those nodes directly, Thorn understood immediately. We could decapitate the beast without burning down the entire forest. The thought was a sliver of light in their desperate situation. Their weapon was a sledgehammer, brutal and indiscriminate. Lena had just handed him the schematics for a scalpel. But first, they had to survive. Down in the mangled heart of engineering, Kalen performed a miracle of sheer, stubborn genius. By fusing the primary and secondary jump coils and bypassing every safety protocol ever written, she had jury-rigged a single, unstable, all-or-nothing jump. It's a controlled demolition, not a drive, she warned Thorn, her face smudged with grease, her eyes glowing with a manic fire in the dim light of a portable lantern. When I engage it, it will either throw us into the Shatterbelt, or it will tear a new black hole where this station used to be. There is no middle ground, and we'll have to do it on a dead reckoning. We don't have enough power for navigational sensors. We'll be jumping blind. The crew gathered on the bridge for the final countdown. The station was a hollow shell of its former self. The lights were out. The air was cold and thin, and the only sound was the ominous groaning of the overstressed hull. They had sacrificed their library, their home, for one last roll of the dice. Thorn stood at the command console, looking at the faces of his crew. These quiet academics and technicians who had become unwilling soldiers in a war for the soul of the galaxy. They were terrified, exhausted, and broken. But they were not silent. The chorus promises a world without scars, Thorn said, his voice quiet but carrying through the tense silence of the bridge. We know that a life without scars is a life without meaning. Whatever happens next, know that what you did mattered. You gave a silent universe a voice. You reminded it what it means to be beautifully, terribly alive. He nodded to Kalen, who was patched in from engineering, take us home. Kaylin. Her voice was tight, engaging the Frankendrive in 3, 2, 1. The world dissolved. It was not a jump. It was an epileptic fit. The station screamed, a chorus of tearing metal and shrieking energy. Reality buckled, folded, and snapped back into place with a final, bone-jarring impact that threw everyone to the deck. Thorn's head slammed against a console, and, for a moment, darkness claimed him. He came to the taste of blood in his mouth, to a sight that was both terrifying and breathtaking. The view screen was alive. They had made it. Gamora Station was a nightmare of light and motion, a sprawling or chaotic city built into and around a dozen hollowed-out asteroids, all lashed together with a web of glowing energy bridges and docking tubes. Ships of every shape and size swarmed around it like angry hornets, scarred pirate frigates, hulking scrap haulers, and sleek, deadly-looking interceptors. The comm channels exploded with a cacophony of noise, dozens of languages, haggling, threats, encrypted data bursts, and the distant pulse of heavy, industrial music. It was the polar opposite of the chorus's serene hum. It was the sound of life in its messiest, most dangerous form. A jarring proximity alert blared through the bridge as 3 heavily armed interceptors, painted with the leering skull of a forgotten war syndicate, moved to bracket their crippled station. A new voice, this one rough, synthesized, and dripping with contempt, crackled over their speakers. Unidentified vessel, you are trespassing in the domain of the junk lords. You are crippled, leaking radiation, and uglier than a Cathar's backside. State your name and your purpose. Give me one good reason why we shouldn't blast you into dust and sell you for parts. Thorn pulled himself to his feet, a Slotsu, grim smile spreading across his bruised face. He looked at the beautiful, violent chaos before them, a sanctuary of sinners and survivors. He keyed the comms, his voice steady and clear. This is Director Elias Thorn of the Terran vessel Silence Breaker. He broadcast. We're not here to trade. We're here to recruit. We've come to remind the galaxy how to start a proper riot. The junk lords did not, as a rule, welcome newcomers with open arms. Their currency was leverage, their language was threat, and their primary diplomatic tool was a disproportionate display of firepower. Thorn's declaration was met with a long, derisive silence, followed by the hiss of weapon systems locking onto their hull. The 3 interceptors tightened their formation, their plasma cannons glowing with predatory intent. Recruit. The synthesized voice sneered back. The only thing you'll be recruiting in my space is a salvage crew to pick through your bones. You have 10 seconds to transmit your docking codes and prepare for boarding and impound. Refuse, and I'll turn your floating library into a cloud of very expensive confetti. On the bridge of the Silence Breaker, a fresh wave of despair washed over the crew. They had survived a god and a blind jump across the galaxy, only to be cornered by a pack of glorified junkyard dogs. But Thorn remained unnervingly calm. He had spent his life studying not just the content of communication, but its form. He recognized the bluster, the theatrical posturing of a predator who preferred intimidation to actual conflict. Gamora Station is a free port. Is it not, Thorn Broadcast? His tone shifting from defiant to conversational, the voice of a scholar posing a theoretical question. Or have the junk lords become a formal government, imposing taxes and sovereign law I was under the impression this was a place where information was the only true currency. There was another pause. The voice on the other end lost some of its synthesized swagger. Information is valuable. Scrap is profit. Your ship is scrap. My logic is sound. Your logic is short-sighted. Thorn countered, stepping closer to the comm unit. I have information more valuable than the salvage rights to 1,000 crippled ships. I have the psychic signature of a new galactic power, an entity that is systematically and silently erasing every independent world in its path, an entity that calls itself the Chorus. He let the words hang in the silence. On a station like Gamora, fear was a commodity, and a new, unknown threat was the rarest vintage of all. The crews of these pirate ships were not brave soldiers. They were opportunists who preyed on the predictable and ran from the unknown. An invisible, mind-altering entity was the very definition of a bad business environment. The silence stretched. The weapon locks remained, but they felt less certain now. "You're lying," the voice finally said, but the conviction was gone. "I have sensor logs of their psychic broadcast." Thorn pressed, bluffing with the confidence of a man holding a royal flush. "I have recordings of their effect on the Xylon system. I have proof that they have already pacified Earth and are expanding their harmonious influence. Their methods are subtle. They don't conquer. They convert. There is no defense against them, no treaty to be made. They will not trade with you. They will not negotiate. They will simply quiet you. And a quiet Gamora is a dead Gamora. Wouldn't you agree?" A tense, static-filled minute passed. The interceptors held their positions, but the glow from their cannons faded. Finally, a new voice broke the silence. This one organic, a low, gravelly baritone that had been filtered through a lifetime of cheap cigars and recycled air. "Bring your ship into Docking Bay 13. Power down all non-essential systems. You will be met. And Thorn, if you are lying, the last sound you ever hear will be your own screaming." The interceptors peeled away, and a series of green docking lights illuminated a path toward one of the station's larger, heavily armored asteroid hubs. A collective sigh of relief swept through the silence breaker. Kaylin, her face a mask of grime and exhaustion, managed a weak, triumphant grin over the engineering comm. "You magnificent, silver-tongued bastard," she breathed. "You just talked a shark out of eating us by promising it a kraken." Docking Bay 13 was a cavernous, dimly lit hangar that smelled of ozone, spilled fuel, and unidentifiable alien sweat. As the ramp of the silence breaker lowered, the crew was met not by an army, but by a single figure. She was a tall, wiry woman with chrome-plated prosthetic arms and a network of data jacks embedded in her temples. Her face was a patchwork of old scars and new, cynical lines, and her eyes, dark and analytical, missed nothing. She introduced herself only as Silo, the Junk Lord's chief intelligence broker. "Thorn," she said, her voice a dry rasp. "I'm the one who decides if your information is valuable, or if your crew spends the next cycle being disassembled for spare parts. Talk." Standing in the echoing hangar, surrounded by the hulking, silent shapes of docked smuggling vessels, Thorn laid it all out. He didn't speak of saving humanity or fighting for freedom. He spoke their language. He spoke of risk assessment, of existential threats to market stability, of an enemy that could not be bought, bribed, or intimidated. He showed Silo the fragmented sensor data Lena had compiled, the waveforms of the chorus's psychic assault, the before and after logs of Xylos' planetary broadcasts. Silo listened, her cybernetic arms crossed, her expression unreadable. She processed the information with the detached calm of a machine, occasionally asking sharp, incisive questions about broadcast frequencies, psychic resistance, and potential vulnerabilities. When Thorn finished, she stood in silence for a long time, her dark eyes staring into the middle distance as if parsing a billion lines of code. This entity, the Chorus, she finally said. It offers perfect order, no conflict, no crime, no chaotic variables. To many in the galaxy, that would sound like paradise. Paradise is bad for business, Thorn said simply. A slow ice-cold smile touched Silo's lips for the first time. Indeed, chaos is our ecosystem. Conflict is our currency. This chorus is not just a threat to our freedom, it is a threat to our entire economy. It must be liquidated. The deal was struck. The Junk Lords, a loose confederation of the Shatterbelt's most powerful smuggling and mercenary syndicates, would provide the resources to repair and upgrade the Silence Breaker. In return, Thorn and his crew would provide the intelligence and the weapon. Gamora Station became their shipyard, their laboratory, and their recruiting ground. The news of the Silence Plague, as the pirates began to call it, spread through the station's dark corners like a contagion of fear. Thorn's story was embellished, whispered in smoky cantinas and encrypted back-channel messages. He became a legend, the Ghost Speaker, the man who had faced the Mind Eaters and returned with their secrets. Mercenaries, thieves, and deserters, men and women who hadn't fought for a cause in their entire lives, began to appear at Docking Bay 13. They weren't drawn by patriotism or a sense of justice, but by a primal, self-interested terror. The chorus was a threat that couldn't be outrun or paid off. For the first time, the disparate, selfish factions of the Shatterbelt had a common enemy. The Silence Breaker was transformed. Its hull was reinforced with salvaged armor plating from a derelict warship. Its crippled reactor was replaced with a volatile but powerful military-grade core Kalen's team acquired from a quarantine freighter. Its new weapons were a chaotic patchwork of technologies, kinetic railguns, plasma projectors, and EMP torpedoes, all jury-rigged and dangerously overclocked. But the most significant upgrade was to its soul. Lena and Silo, an unlikely pairing of a sensitive artist and a ruthless data broker, worked to refine Pandora's voice. They no longer had to rely on a crude, overwhelming blast of raw emotion. Using the psychic signature Lena had captured, they began to design targeted mimetic payloads, specific sequences of contradictory ideas and emotions designed to exploit the logical structure of the chorus's consciousness. They learned how to weaponize irony, how to code a paradox into a psychic frequency. They were no longer building a bomb. They were forging a key to unlock a god's mind and fill it with poison. Thorn, meanwhile, became the reluctant leader of a nascent rebellion. He spent his days in tense negotiations with syndicate leaders, grizzled mercenary captains, and information brokers, weaving a fragile alliance held together by fear and greed. He found he had a talent for it, this cold manipulation of self-interest. The quiet archivist was gone, replaced by a strategist who saw souls as assets and motivations as leverage. His new fleet was a motley collection of about 30 ships, a fleet of broken teeth, as Kalen called it. None of them were a match for a true military vessel, but they were fast, unpredictable, and crewed by people who knew how to fight dirty. During a strategy meeting in the now refurbished command center of the Silence Breaker, Silo brought up a new piece of intelligence gleaned from a deep space listening post. "The chorus is moving," she announced, her voice flat and serious. "Their psychic hum is expanding, and it's coalescing around a new target system, Cygnus X1. A murmur went through the assembled captains. Cygnus X1 wasn't a planet. It was a black hole, home to the Cygnian Ascendancy, a species of non-corporeal, energy-based life forms who lived in the swirling accretion disk. The Cygnians were ancient, enigmatic, and communicated through complex songs of light and gravity. They were also one of the few species in the galaxy considered to be post-individual, their consciousnesses loosely linked in a way that had always fascinated and disturbed other races. "They're a perfect target for the chorus," Lena said, her face grim. "Their minds are already networked. The chorus won't have to build a harmony, they'll just have to change the tune. If they absorb the Cygnians, their psychic power will increase 1,000-fold. Thorn looked at the faces around the holographic map. The fear was back, palpable and cold. The chorus wasn't just expanding, it was consolidating power, absorbing unique forms of consciousness to make itself stronger. "Then that's where we hit them," Thorn said, his voice cutting through the tension. "We can't let them take the Cygnians. We will take our fleet of broken teeth, and we will bite." A grizzled pirate captain, a man whose face was more scar tissue than skin, spat on the floor. "It's suicide. They'll know we're coming. That psychic god of yours will feel us a system away." "That's exactly what I'm counting on," Thorn replied, a cold, dangerous light in his eyes. "Last time, we were the ones who were surprised. This time, they're the ones walking into a trap. This time, the orchestra is playing our song." The journey to Cygnus X1 was a descent into cosmic madness. The Shatterbelt's chaos was a gentle nursery rhyme compared to the raw, untamed violence of a black hole's domain. Gravity warped space-time into a funhouse mirror. Radiation painted the view screen with shimmering ghosts. And the pirate fleet flew through gravitational tides that threatened to peel their ships apart like ripe fruit. It was an environment of pure elemental dissonance, and it was here that Thorn intended to make his stand. The chorus was waiting, not with warships, but as a silent, monolithic presence that dwarfed the physical chaos around them. It was a psychic dead zone, a vast region of space where the frantic energy of the accretion disk was eerily calm, smoothed over by a will of unimaginable power. The hum was so potent here that the crews of the fleet felt it as a physical pressure, a siren song promising stillness and safety in the heart of the storm. "They've created an island of order in the middle of a hurricane." Kalen's voice crackled over the comm, tight with a new kind of fear. "They're daring us to enter. It's a psychic fly trap." "They expect us to attack that island," Thorn said, his eyes fixed on the shimmering light songs of the Cygnians, now faint and muted within the chorus's zone of control. "They believe we will throw our chaos against their order. They are mistaken." He turned to Lena, whose station was now the nexus of their entire strategy. Her face was pale, her eyes luminous in the glow of her console, where the mimetic payloads shimmered like captive souls. "The Cygnians are not yet lost," Thorn continued. "Their song is suppressed, but not silenced. Our target is not the chorus. It is them. We are not here to fight a god. We are here to start a choir. The plan was as elegant as it was suicidal. The fleet of broken teeth would act as a distraction, a chaotic swarm of gnats dancing at the edge of the chorus's influence, firing their conventional weapons and broadcasting a cacophony of pirate radio chatter, battle cries, and profane sea shanties, a barrage of low-level, meaningless noise to occupy the chorus's attention. Under the cover of this manufactured chaos, the silence breaker would push deep into the psychic dead zone, right to the edge of the Signian's light song. There, they would not broadcast a weapon. They would broadcast an invitation. "Payload Prometheus is ready," Lena whispered, her fingers hovering over the launch sequence. It was her masterpiece, a mimetic sequence built not of grief or rage, but of the most complex and beautiful ideas humanity had ever conceived. It contained the soaring, unresolved questions of theoretical physics, the heartbreaking beauty of a Bach cantata, the paradoxical philosophies of Zen masters, and the defiant, hopeful art of 1,000 silenced cultures. It was not a weapon to break a mind, but a key designed to unlock one. "Fire Prometheus," Thorn commanded. The silence breaker shuddered as it unleashed its silent message. It was a whisper of pure, complex beauty fired into the heart of a muted song. For a moment, nothing happened. The psychic pressure from the chorus intensified, its vast consciousness turning its attention toward this new, unexpected variable. "You offer them the disease of questions." The chorus's voice echoed in their minds, no longer curious, but filled with a cold, absolute fury. "There are no questions. There is only the answer." The entity focused its will, a psychic lance of pure certainty aimed at the silence breaker, intending to crush this pocket of dissonance once and for all. Thorn gripped his console, the pressure in his skull building to an unbearable level. "Now, Lena," he gasped. "The real weapon." This was the true trap. By focusing its power on them, the chorus had exposed its core, its central I, and into that focused, singular consciousness. Lena unleashed the final payload. It was a single, simple, and utterly poisonous thought, a mimetic virus Silo had engineered, born from the cynical, self-serving heart of Gamora Station. It was the concept of profit and loss. The broadcast contained no emotion, only a cold, logical, and irrefutable audit. It showed the chorus the immense energy it expended to maintain its harmony. It showed the art, the science, the unique perspectives it had erased, cataloging them not as tragedies, but as squandered assets. It framed its entire crusade not as a noble act of unification, but as a monumentally inefficient act of cosmic vandalism, a net loss of universal complexity. The chorus did not scream. It did not recoil. It hesitated. For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty entered the perfect, placid ocean of its mind. The logic was inescapable. It had destroyed incalculable value for a state of being that produced nothing. In that single moment of divine self-doubt, the Signians answered. Thorn's message had reached them. Awakened and enraged by the attempted silencing, their light songs exploded outward. But they were no longer just songs of beauty. They were discordant anthems of war. They amplified the Prometheus payload, taking humanity's questions and weaving them into a gravitational symphony of defiance. The island of calm in the accretion disk shattered. The chorus's psychic control, predicated on absolute certainty, fractured under the combined assault of human paradox and Signian art. The hum across the galaxy wavered, then broke. On 100 worlds, sleeping minds began to stir, the monolithic harmony dissolving back into a cacophony of individual thoughts. The chorus, its focus broken, its very purpose questioned from within, retreated. It did not flee in a rout, but simply withdrew, its vast psychic presence shrinking, pulling back into the deep, silent places between galaxies, a wounded god returning to its heaven to contemplate a flaw in its own divinity. The battle was over. The pirate fleet, battered and bruised, floated in the chaotic, now liberated energies of Cygnus X1, watching as the Signian songs of light returned to their full, brilliant glory. The victory was quiet, surreal. They hadn't defeated the chorus with cannons or bombs, but with an idea. On the bridge of the Silence Breaker, the exhausted crew slowly began to cheer, their raw, ragged voices filling the silence. It was a messy, discordant, and beautiful sound. Thorn stood apart from them, watching the revitalized Signian lights dance. The war was not over. The chorus was not destroyed, but it was no longer a certainty. They had given the universe a fighting chance. They had given it back its noise. 6 months later, the Silence Breaker floated in quiet orbit around a newly terraformed moon, its hull scarred but whole. The fleet of Broken Teeth had largely disbanded, its captains returning to their old, selfish ways. But they carried with them the story of the Ghost Speaker, a legend that kept the memory of the chorus alive, a warning against the seductive peace of silence. The galaxy was awake, and it was messy. Some worlds freed from the hum descended into civil war, unable to cope with the sudden return of conflict. Others flourished, their art and science exploding with a renewed, chaotic vigor. The dissonance had returned. Elias Thorn, the archivist, stood once more on his observation deck. The data feeds were alive again, a roaring, glorious cascade of 1,000 different cultures arguing, creating, loving, and hating. He had not restored the old Earth. That world was gone forever. Instead, he had helped birth something new, a galaxy that was aware of the fragility of its own beautiful chaos. His life's work was no longer to preserve the noise of the past in a quiet library, but to safeguard the space for new noises to be made. The comm chimed. It was Lena. "Elias," she said, her voice filled with a quiet energy he hadn't heard since before the fall. "I'm picking something up. A new broadcast from the Xylon system. It's not a scream. It's a poem. A very angry, very sad, and very beautiful poem about learning how to fly with broken wings." Thorn smiled, a genuine, weary smile that reached his eyes. The scars were there. They would always be there. But a life without scars was a life without meaning. He looked out at the riot of stars, at the infinite, discordant orchestra of the cosmos, and for the first time, he felt at peace with the sound. He was a keeper of chaos, a guardian of dissonance, an archivist of the beautiful, terrible, unending argument. And the argument had just begun.